We now know the Sacramento Kings have the 4th overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft, and now the real fun begins. I still believe there's a high likelihood of the Kings trading this pick. Certainly, there's going to be a lot of the Kings shopping this pick, and one of the trades discussed on Kings social media last night was the possibility of the Kings and Detroit Pistons swapping picks, the Kings moving back one spot and maybe getting Jerami Grant in the trade as well. I'm going to be joined by Ku Khahil, host of the Locked On Pistons podcast, to discuss the possibility and probability of this trade on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm looking forward to covering my 9th season of Kings basketball beginning in October. Spent the last 5 years as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network here hosting Locked On Kings. Currently work for ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And one of the best parts about working for this Locked On Podcast Network is getting to interact with all the other great local hosts here on Locked On Kings. Ku Khahil is actually, over the last 6 months or so, he's been a pretty frequent guest here on Locked On Kings. We had a couple different connections before and after the Kings trade deadline with the move that the Kings made, sending Marvin Bagley to Detroit. We were discussing the possibility of the Kings trading for either Saddiq Bey or Jerami Grant before the trade deadline. And now that the Kings have leaped ahead of the Pistons, much to the chagrin of their fans and even Ku, it's now a honestly very real possibility that the Kings could convince the Pistons to take a step forward in the draft, take the 4th overall pick, but give up an asset like Jerami Grant in the process. But as Ku and I are going to discuss here, there's something significant that needs to happen in order to turn this possible trade into maybe even a likely trade. But that will only happen on draft night. Ku Khahil and I discuss it right here on Locked On Kings. Well, we now know where the Sacramento Kings pick lands. Number 4 overall, way better than what we expected initially. And now we can enjoy the speculation of what do the Kings do with number 4 overall? Do they draft a player or do they trade the pick like many of us believe was going to be the case if they were at 7? And with 4 overall, the Kings can really look at the possibility of trading down in the draft, getting a worse pick, but also taking on assets in a trade like that. And maybe they don't have to trade that far down. Joining me right now, Ku Khahil from the Locked On Pistons podcast. Ku, the Pistons end up at 5, the Kings end up at 4. I'm not going to start this podcast asking how you're doing because I know last night wasn't the greatest night for you. We'll just jump into the possibility of these two teams being trade partners. Could you see a reasonable future where the Pistons and the Kings end up swapping?
I see a future where it could happen, but it would require some stuff to happen top 3 wise that we probably aren't expecting to happen at this point.
That's a great place to start. So assuming the top 3 is what some combination of what everybody believes to be Jabari, Chet, and Paulo, Jaden Ivy, what does he do for you? What does he do for Detroit Pistons fans? I imagine, based off the sound of it, it doesn't sound like there would be a yearning or maybe a desperation is the correct word for Detroit to want to get their hands on Ivy so much so that they're willing to trade away an asset just to move up one spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think the Pistons would be interested in moving up for Jaden Ivy. I personally, right now, I haven't done a deep dive into him, but I have some base level concerns about his fit with the Pistons in general. And I don't think that I know a lot of Pistons fans do love him. He's explosive. It seems like he's fun to watch. But I know that there's between him and Sharp, I don't think there's that big of a difference between them to where the Pistons would want, like you said, give up an asset just to move up one spot. And also there's some other wings that the Pistons have been rumored to be liking, Keegan Murray, AJ Griffin. So I think at the position the Pistons are at 5, I don't think they would be moving up for one of those guys. I feel like they probably have a lot of those guys around the same type of tier.
out of the top three, it is very possible that one of them does slide, although I wouldn't necessarily bet against it right now. But out of the top three, what's the dream scenario of the player that slides? And in your mind, who's the most likely to slide? Are they the same person?
So I think the most likely person to slide is Paolo. I think it's pretty set in stone that Chet will be going one to Orlando. It sounds like that Jabari is pretty set to go OKC number 2. And then Paolo, I think that's where, again, I think he does go 3. I think those guys will be the top 3. But I think if I had to pick one, it'd be Paolo, because I kind of question whether, they have Kevin Porter Jr., they have Jalen Green, they have Christian Wood, a lot of guys that want the ball in their hands. And Paolo's another guy that probably is going to need the ball in his hands. So I question whether that would be like the best possible fit. They probably don't care about fit. They're just going to take the best talent right now. But I think out of all the top 3 guys, I think Paolo would be the most likely one to fall, even though, again, I don't see any of them falling.
So it's interesting then. If we get to draft night and there's 5 minutes in between each pick and we see the Houston Rockets at number 3 go in a different direction and Paolo is available at 4, are the Pistons then potentially, again, desperate doesn't feel like the right word, but if the Kings pick up the phone and call the Detroit Pistons and say, we're taking Paolo here unless you make us a big offer, what would Detroit asset-wise be most willing to give up to move that spot? How desperate would they be to move up that spot to land Paolo?
So the thing is that I think that would become very interesting if Paolo were to fall to you guys at 4. I think that's when you possibly would start seeing the Pistons consider a move up. The thing is that it requires the Pistons would have to take literally their entire offseason into account before they pulled this move off, because right now they're rumored to be interested in DeAndre Ayton in free agency. He's a restricted free agent, and that might have to require a sign and trade, which would probably require Jerami Grant in that situation, I think. So if they do decide to move Jerami Grant, if let's say Paolo falls to 4 and the Kings, like you said, call the Pistons, say, hey, we're going to take Paolo unless you offer us a trade, I think obviously the trade would have to center around Jerami Grant. And if they do that trade, I'm not going to say they're punting on DeAndre Ayton, because they could still get him without Jerami Grant possibly, but I think that would lessen the likelihood of that happening. So they would have to make a choice right then and there, like, we are going to go after Paolo, we'll trade Jerami for Paolo, or discuss a package around that area. And we are understanding that is going to come at the risk that we might not be able to pull off a signing of DeAndre Ayton. So I think it would be incredibly interesting. I think it would be, if Paolo fell, I think that's when things would start heating up a little bit.
So this conversation is already kind of going in a direction which I expected. And you brought up Jerami Grant there. No mention of Sadiq Bey at all. And I've been telling Kings fans in the interactions that I've been having on social media, even before chatting with you about Sadiq Bey, I've been sharing with you the Kings would absolutely have to blow the Pistons out of the water with a deal, or they would have to be truly desperate in order to include Saddiq Bey in a package. We're talking the only way the Kings probably would have gotten Saddiq Bey is if they had moved into the top 3 or maybe even top 2. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, I think it would take that. And then even if they did, you guys did move into the top 2, top 3, I don't think Troy Weaver would be interested. Would you want a top 3 pick for Saddiq Bey? Probably. Like, if I was a GM and I was offered like a top 3 pick for Saddiq Bey, is that value wise where he's at? Yeah, it's probably more value wise than what he actually is. But I think that Troy Weaver probably would still pass on that, because Saddiq Bey has developed really well. He's a nice player, and they really like Saddiq Bey. So I don't think that Troy Weaver is even interested in discussing a Saddiq Bey trade anywhere, unless it's getting like a superstar.
Let's talk pre-draft here. The Kings, the reason why this trade is appealing in a lot of ways for Kings fans and the Kings in general is the Kings can potentially kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Dismissing the idea of Saddiq Bey, which I'm pretty confident in doing across the board. Jerami Grant is a name that the Kings have had interest in. We've discussed before, Ku, you and I have discussed Jerami Grant before, going back to conversations before last season's trade deadline. Jerami Grant theoretically fills that 4-spot hole. And in addition to that, the Kings being able to get the 5th pick on top of that, the Kings would not just trade number 4 for Saddiq or for Jerami Grant. So they're taking back number 5 in this trade. That gives them the opportunity to take a Keegan Murray, who many believe is that ideal fit prospect for the Kings, that maybe 4 is too high, or maybe they go the direction of Sharp. Maybe they go the direction of AJ Griffin. It allows them to pick another player who's not considered top 4 that is maybe better fit over higher ceiling. So there are a lot of reasons why this trade would be ideal for the Sacramento Kings, but you have to have 2 to tango. Why would in any way this trade be ideal, if at all, for the Detroit Pistons?
So it would be ideal, in the only scenario for me is if Paolo Banchero fell.
Yeah.
If Paolo Banchero fell to the number 4 pick, and if the Pistons are extremely high on Paolo, I have him number 1 on my little draft list. I think he's the best guy in the draft, but I can't say the same for the Pistons. I don't know where they're thinking there. So if they have him that high on their list and he falls to 4, that would require that they would have a level of interest in doing that. And I think that, like I said earlier, it's going to be tough. It would be such a tough 5 minutes for the Pistons to really decide what they want to do, because I do think that it makes sense if Banchero fell to 4 that they would make this trade. Maybe I was talking with some Piston people earlier today. They threw out Grant and 5 for Kings 4 and Holmes, or Kings 4 and Barnes, something like that, and just swapping something like that for Banchero. And I could see that happening. But also, the thing that goes into it is that Portland is also very interested in Jerami Grant. They've been pushing for him for a long time, and they have 7. So then also now it goes back again to, okay, if you're the Detroit Pistons, do you want to keep 5 and potentially trade Jerami for 7? Then you have 5 and 7. Or if Banchero is there at 4, do you forego the opportunity of getting 2 picks in the top 7 to get a guy that I'm assuming he would have to be close to the top of your board in order for you to do a trade like this, forfeit 5 and 7, and just give up Jerami Grant and 4 or 5 to go up to 4 to get him. So it's going to be incredibly interesting. I do see an interest and a reason for him to do it if Banchero were to fall, but it's just, there's so many things that they will have to take into account, because Jerami Grant is such a sought after name right now that they have to figure out which pathway do they want to go. Do they want to go the Kings way? Do they want to go the Suns way with DeAndre Ayton possibly? Do they want to go with the Portland Trailblazers? It's going to be, I'm assuming that we'll probably get a better idea of that by then. We'll have a month of rumors and some intel that gets leaked out. So, but it is interesting. I could see it happening possibly.
I'm glad you brought up Barnes and Holmes. I'm speaking for the Kings in this scenario, but of course I'm not general manager of the Kings. I have no idea if they'd feel as strongly about this as I do. I personally, in this negotiation, would take Harrison Barnes off the table. If the Kings can find a way to bring in a player like Jerami Grant and still have Barnes on their roster, even though he is an expiring contract, I've been saying a lot this offseason, if the Kings can find a way to improve their roster and still have Harrison Barnes be their 4th scoring option, they've done very, very well for themselves. Richaun Holmes absolutely is included in this conversation. But if you're the general manager of the Pistons, I'm general manager of the Kings, I'm saying Harrison Barnes is not available in this deal. Is that a deal breaker for you?
No, I don't think it's a deal breaker. I think Holmes is interesting, even though he has some off the court things I know that there are going on.
They are cleared. Just so you know, they have been, for the most part, cleared. A Los Angeles court ruled in favor of Richaun Holmes. He has his son back. And for the most part, it sounds like it's water under the bridge at this point, just for context.
Oh, fair enough then. So I actually like Holmes. So it wouldn't be a deal breaker. Again, I'm not, like you said, we're not the actual GMs or anything, but it wouldn't be a deal breaker for me for Barnes to be off the table. I still am interested in Holmes. I think he fits kind of what the Pistons are doing. And again, if I'm that high on Banchero, the drop off between Holmes and Barnes and Holmes isn't enough for me to say, no, I just don't want it, because the real prize of the deal would be getting Banchero.
Big thank you to Ku for joining me here on the Locked On Kings podcast. I want to hear your thoughts on the possibility of this trade happening. It doesn't sound like it's too likely unless, like we discussed, Paolo drops to 4. Are you rooting for that to happen so that a trade like this can happen? If Paolo dropped, would you just want the Kings to take him and forget about this trade in general? Let me know at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. And I know Pistons fans are also watching and listening to this podcast. Are you for this? You like the idea of this trade? You think it's a dumb trade? You'd rather the Pistons just take somebody at 5? Also, weigh in, join the discussion as well. Let's have some fun here. I really appreciate you tuning in. And I appreciate Athletic Greens for being a phenomenal sponsor of the Locked On Kings podcast. Athletic Greens' AG1 is something that everybody should have as part of their diet. What is AG1? It's one delicious scoop of quality ingredients, nutrients, 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging, all of the things. AG1 takes care of. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy free, or gluten free. Contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, while still tasting delicious. And instead of spending all that money to go and get these supplements and do this yourself at home, and instead of having to deal with, honestly, the costly lifestyle that is eating and drinking healthy, AG1 Athletic Greens, they're here to help you out. It's less expensive than your cold brew habit, costs less than $3 a day, cheaper than getting all those supplements by yourself. You're investing in an all-in-one nutritional insurance. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/lockedon, or rather, sorry, athleticgreens.com/NBA network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NBA network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. I haven't really hit it since the Kings found out that they were landing at number 4. Hell, I've been preaching the possibility and the likelihood and my desire for the Kings to look heavily into trading this draft pick for the last couple of months. And I stand by that. Even though this pick is at number 4, I think there is a lot of value to be gained by the Kings trading this pick. But I want to clarify something extremely important here. The main difference in trading the 4 pick versus trading the 7 pick. If I'm trading the number 4 overall pick in this year's draft, I need to get a starter in return. I will accept nothing less. I'm not even interested in multiple solid role players. If I'm trading number 4 overall, I need to get a starter. Therefore, it makes it more difficult and therefore less likely that the Kings end up moving this pick. We're going to discuss a ton of trades. I have a guest coming up, Brad Rowland from the Locked On Hawks podcast. I'm going to be doing an interview with him in the near future. We're going to discuss the possibility of the Kings using this number 4 pick to execute a trade for John Collins. There are going to be a ton of rumors and a ton of trade conversations surrounding that number 4 pick, all the way up until the draft itself a little over a month from now, including in our Locked On Ultimate Mock Draft. You best believe I'm going to shop this number 4 pick as hard as I possibly can, and I'll let you know how that went, the interest from the other hosts. I guarantee you, whether in our mock draft or in real life NBA, there is going to be at least one team, if not multiple teams, that are very, very interested in Jaden Ivy, want Jaden Ivy, and are going to be contacting the Kings, or the Kings will contact them in order to try and work out a deal. But again, I do not trade number 4 overall unless I'm getting a starter caliber player. That's why I humor this conversation with the Detroit Pistons, because in this case, the Kings could get a starter caliber player in Jerami Grant and also be on the board to take a guy like Keegan Murray. And Keegan Murray, really over the last 12 hours, has picked up a lot of steam and has been involved in a lot of conversations here in Sacramento. Not that he wasn't discussed before, but the Jaden Ivy versus Keegan Murray debate is going to get really fun and really intense, I think, here in Sacramento over the next month leading up to the draft, because you have a guy that I think it's fair to say Jaden Ivy, in terms of ceiling, is a tier above Keegan Murray. At least a lot of people feel that way. It's definitely not guaranteed, set in stone. Nothing's set in stone when you're talking about draft prospects and draft picks. Like, they haven't played a second of the NBA yet, and more often than not, we get things wrong. Even the experts around the draft get things wrong. But as of right now, Jaden Ivy is generally considered to be a tier above Keegan Murray. So in terms of upside, explosiveness, athleticism, excitement, Jaden Ivy is really appealing at that 4 spot, even though he is a guard. This would be the 3rd straight draft that Monte McNair takes a guard when DeAaron Fox is still on this roster. Not to mention last year's pick, Davion Mitchell, still on this roster. But Keegan Murray, if there was a close to perfect fit draft pick, Keegan Murray is it. He checks so many of the boxes that I have been discussing on Locked On Kings for the last month. The Kings are looking to fill that starting 4 spot and find a player that they can pair in the front court next to Domantas Sabonis, that can space the floor, that helps out defensively, that can protect the rim. Keegan Murray does all of those things. And Murray was successful offensively, averaging around 20 points per game, without having plays drawn up for him. He was a guy that he scored in the flow of the offense, and that's exactly how he would play here in Sacramento. he would be at best a third option, more likely a fourth option who spaces the floor. He won't get in Sabonis' way on offense. And then defensively, he helps the Kings out where we know they need to desperately improve. So once again, we're back to this best player available versus fit conversation, right? And the Kings have picked fit over best player available in the past, and it's burned them. It's got them in trouble. I do not turn my nose up at all. In fact, I completely understand those I've been interacting with on social media, on Kings Twitter, who have said, no, you take Jaden Ivy no matter what. And I don't care if there's a concern of him fitting next to DeAaron Fox or not, because you picked Luka Doncic, or rather part of the reason why you picked Marvin Bagley over Luka Doncic is you didn't want to take the ball out of Fox's hands. Also, the Kings messed up and evaluated Bagley as higher ceiling and higher potential than Luka, and we all know how that ended up. Another reason why you traded Tyrese Halliburton, or the main reason why you traded Tyrese Halliburton, well, one of the main reasons was that you could get a player like Domantas Sabonis here in Sacramento, but also there was questions about whether Fox and Halliburton could play together and could fit together long-term in a backcourt. So you essentially, in a way, chose De'Aaron Fox over Tyrese Halliburton. You've done that twice. As good as De'Aaron Fox is, he's your max contract player, he's your star player as of right now, Fox and the Kings haven't won yet. So do you once again make a decision based off of what you think fits best with Fox instead of just playing taking the best talent and figuring it the hell out? A lot of people compare Jaden Ivey's game to that of Ja Morant. I guarantee you, if the Kings had the choice between Ja Morant and De'Aaron Fox, they'd take Ja Morant 100% of the time right now, which was very different from what I was saying around this time last year. There is a possibility if the Kings take Jaden Ivey and it doesn't work, that the Kings move on from De'Aaron Fox in that scenario. But I am here for both sides of this argument. I am very much here for the Keegan Murray versus Jaden Ivey argument all summer long. I am so here for it because both sides make hell of a good argument. Both sides make a lot of sense, and I honestly would be happy with either. Personally, I'm leaning more towards Murray. I'm leaning more towards fit. But I also feel scared, because I think Jaden Ivey could be that explosive player that we look back at 2-3 years from now and go, oh, the Kings went a safer route. And even if Keegan Murray is good, Ivey could be great. And I also think that I don't know necessarily how it works. And I'm a little more skeptical because of what happened between Fox and Halliburton, even though Halliburton being more of a pass first guard and Jaden Ivey being more of a scoring first guard, that's pretty different. But it's safe to say Fox and Halliburton didn't really work out. So was De'Aaron Fox and Jaden Ivey going to work out? And it's not so much a pro choosing De'Aaron over Ivey conversation. It's the Kings are trying to win basketball games right away. They're trying to win next season. They don't really have time to get those two to spend half the season to figure it out if they even do it all. I love both sides. I want to hear this argument from you. Are you team Jaden Ivey? Are you team Keegan Murray? Hell, maybe you don't like either of them. Maybe you're going in a different direction. You want somebody else. If so, let me know. At Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, and get loose in the comment section on YouTube with this debate. I want to have Keegan Murray versus Jaden Ivey, that debate raging for the next month. I am here for it. I cannot wait to have those conversations and continue those conversations. And we're going to do so with even more context coming up because I have so many amazing guests coming on Locked On Kings. I've booked, now including Ku Khahil, I've booked 8 guests over the next week and a half. And I'm close to getting 9 and 10. A lot of great guests. We're diving head first into this draft coverage and possible trade speculation scenarios. We're diving headfirst into it over the next month, man. This is going to be so much fun. I cannot wait for this content. I'll share with you a list of the guests that are coming on Locked On Kings in the near future after I tell you about a couple of great sponsors of Locked On Kings, 2 familiar sponsors to you. The first being Built Bar. It's perfect timing for me. My birthday is on Monday, and the birthday cake puffs just came out. Finally, Built sent these birthday cake puffs to me here, and I couldn't wait till my birthday to give these things a try. They are so delicious. Their puffs are protein-infused marshmallows. Yeah, that's a thing. I didn't know that was a thing. Protein-infused marshmallows. And that birthday cake flavor, it's like dipping your finger in the plastic tub of birthday cake frosting. That's what you taste, but you don't have to deal with the unhealthiness of it. Instead, it's 150 calories and 16 grams of protein in that sweet that you just ate. That, in addition to the many delicious flavors of Built Bars that are covered in 100% chocolate, are also around 150 calories, also around 16 grams of protein. It's an absolute no-brainer. Satisfy that sweet tooth while also eating healthy. Built.com is where you can get these puffs. You can get these bars. Whatever you get, make sure you use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off. Again, at Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off. Give Built Bars a try, and let me know what your favorite flavor is. And the Locked On Kings podcast brought to you by our friends at Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's honestly impossible for your local chain auto parts store or your dealership to carry the parts that you need while giving you the flexibility and financial security of finding the great deal for you and having options, versatility. Normally, they just price you in. They say, this is what we got, take it or leave it, and you're pretty much stuck. At rockauto.com, it removes all that. You can save 30, 50, or even 100% more on rockauto.com than you would at your local chain auto parts store or at the dealership. For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 from a chain store, only $216 from Rock Auto. And they have so many parts. Rock Auto is a family business, so it's great to support that as well during these tough times. They've been serving do-it-yourself customers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer, no matter your level of how much you know about cars, because I know absolutely nothing, and Rock Auto is able to save me money. Go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So many great guests coming for you here on the Locked On Kings podcast. I have Locked On Thunder host Rylan Stiles joining me to talk about the possibility of the Kings using the number 4 overall pick to maybe execute a trade for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I'm skeptical that the Oklahoma City Thunder would consider that, but Rylan is going to be able to give us context on that. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to have Brad Rowland, host of the Locked On Hawks podcast, to join me to talk about what I think is a very serious possibility of the Kings using number 4 overall to trade for John Collins. Those are just a couple of amazing guests that I'm going to have. Aaron Torres from Fox Sports Radio has covered college basketball for a very long time. Had him on a couple of times during draft season last year. He's going to be back on with me. Rafael Barlow, the host of the Locked On NBA, or one of the hosts of the Locked On NBA Draft podcast, and the new head of the NBA Big Board. He's going to be joining me. He's a friend here of Locked On Kings. I have Jonathan Wasserman from Bleacher Report. He does a lot of their mock drafts. He's going to be joining me. I also have Steven Wiseman. He is a beat writer covering Duke Blue Devils basketball. He's going to join me to talk about both Banchero and AJ Griffin. I have Mike Carmen, who's going to be joining me to talk about Jaden Ivy. He's a Purdue beat writer, so we're going to get great Jaden Ivy context on that. And then I'm just now securing Kennington Lloyd Smith III. He's a beat writer who covers Iowa, and he's going to tell us more about Keegan Murray. So those are just some of the guests that I'm working on and that are coming on Locked On Kings over the next couple of weeks. Very excited to have all those guests. I have no idea what dates are going to be what. I'm going to have podcasts for you a lot here. I don't know if it's going to be all through the weekend. It's going to be the next 5 days. It's going to be broken up. I have no idea what the schedule is. I just know that all of those names are going to be joining me on Locked On Kings. I have dates set in stone and interview time set in stone with them. I'll get all those interviews done, and then we'll try and see what the release schedule is going to look like. But great content coming. Plus, I have more guests that I'm working on that I didn't even mention that I haven't set up a time yet with. So you're going to want to keep it right here on Locked On Kings throughout the entire build-up to the draft and hopefully beyond. But there's not going to be another Kings podcast that is going to give you more guests, give you more insight, and have you more prepared for this NBA draft than Locked On Kings. I can guarantee you that. And I know how great of competition, how many amazing podcasts that you have to listen to about the Kings here in the Sacramento market. Don't stop listening to them, but hopefully we can rise to the top and I can deliver for you the coverage that you deserve here building up to this draft. And I wanted to end my podcast with this. A couple of years ago, I was known as a optimist. Some called me a blind optimist when it came to the Sacramento Kings. And that gained me a lot of listeners, gained me a lot of fans, also turned a lot of people against me. They still listened, but people were not not as on board, let's say, with my optimism towards the Sacramento Kings. Safe to say, the last season and some change killed that optimism in a major way. If you listen to me on Locked On Kings recently, you know that I was not having the best of times talking about the Sacramento Kings and watching the Kings last season. I'm starting to feel that optimism, that sleeping giant waking up in me a little bit. I have a Kings optimism jersey in my closet. I'm starting to dust off a little bit. And to prove it to you, I have a declaration, a prediction to put out there. I already put it out on Twitter, so you may have already seen it. But I'm gonna put something on the line here. I believe that whether it's through trade or it's through the Kings making the playoffs, the Sacramento Kings will not be a part of the 2023 NBA draft lottery. I'm saying it today. The Sacramento Kings will not be a part of the 2023 NBA draft lottery, either by them making the playoffs or them trading that pick away to hopefully make the playoffs. And I'm putting something on the line. If the Kings do appear in the 2023 NBA draft lottery, I will be buying and giving away a Kings jersey of choice to one listener of Locked On Kings. I'm making sure that, please remind me of this. I'm going to probably pin this to my Twitter profile. I'm going to make sure I'm writing this down. If the Sacramento Kings, if my prediction is wrong and the Sacramento Kings are in the 2023 NBA draft lottery next year, then I will buy a Kings jersey of either a custom one or whatever player that a fan wants and send it to that fan. There, set in stone. Put it in writing. I'm excited about it. It's fun to be optimistic again. It's fun to be excited again about the Sacramento Kings. And this is a very exciting time building up to the draft. So I hope you will join me for all the coverage going forward. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're a new listener, welcome in. Really appreciate you. Also, in addition to that jersey bet that I'm making, I'm also doing another giveaway here on Locked On Kings, but you have to work for it a little bit. If you leave a review of the Locked On Kings podcast on Apple Podcasts, I need to get that review number over 350. I'm right around 300 right now. If we get over 350 reviews on Apple Podcasts, I will buy a pair of opening night tickets and give them away to a Kings fan or a couple of Kings fans. So if we get over 350 reviews here on the Locked On Kings podcast on Apple Podcasts, I will give away a pair of opening night tickets this upcoming season. Mark my words. So help me reach that goal. Really appreciate you, regardless if we reach that goal or not. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait for you to join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.